Nightfall on a pirate ship. The sea has its own voice at night. It whispers against the hull, creaks through the mast, and hums low like some great beast breathing beneath the waves. For pirates, the ocean was both a kingdom and a grave, and when the sun sank into the horizon, the line between the two blurred. On this night, the ship Eclipse drifted quietly under a bruised sky. The men had grown restless after a long day of plundering, their pockets full but their spirits uneasy. They laughed, they drank, they sang. Yet their eyes darted toward the horizon where the last smear of red light bled into black. Superstition ran deep among pirates, and all of them knew that nightfall at sea was never to be trusted. The wind dropped, the sails hung slack, the ocean, usually alive with waves, went still as glass. The silence was not peaceful, it was suffocating. The crew felt it pressing against their throats, their laughter fading into nervous whispers. Somewhere in the distance, a gull screamed, the sound torn away as if swallowed by something vast and unseen. The captain, a scarred man known only as Graves, stood at the bow with his spyglass raised. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. He saw no sails, no lights, no land. Nothing but the endless stretch of black water. Yet he kept looking, as though he expected something to appear at any moment. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen Graves stare into the night before, but never for this long. As darkness fell, the moon did not rise. The sky hung heavy, starless, the kind of night that swallowed a man whole if he stared too deep. Lanterns were lit along the deck, their flames trembling, as though even fire feared the dark pressing against them. Below deck, whispers spread among the men. Some claimed the silence meant another ship was near, moving with no wind, an omen. Others muttered that the Eclipse had crossed into cursed waters, the kind where old debts were collected and the sea demanded her due. But the truth was worse than rumor, because when night falls on a pirate ship, it does not come alone. It brings something with it. The first sign came just after midnight. A lantern at the stern flickered, sputtered, and went out. No one touched it, no wind passed through, yet its flame died as though smothered by unseen hands. One of the younger deckhands hurried over to relight it, but when he bent down, he froze. The wick was not burnt out. It had been crushed flat, as though fingers had pinched the fire dead. He said nothing. He simply stepped back and crossed himself, eyes wide. From that moment forward, the shadows seemed to shift differently across the deck. They no longer clung to the lanterns or stretched naturally with the wood. Instead, they swayed, pulsed, almost breathed. Men began to notice shapes moving just outside the ring of firelight, too quick to name, too fluid to belong to flesh. The ship creaked in ways it never had before. The ropes groaned as though strained by weight, yet no hands pulled them. Boots clicked against the deck where no man walked. And above, the rigging shivered, though no wind stirred the sails. One man swore he saw a figure perched high on the mainmast, crouched like a crow, its outline darker than the sky itself. But when he pointed, the shape vanished, leaving only the ropes swaying gently. Captain Graves ordered more lanterns lit. The deck glowed with trembling fire, but the light seemed weaker than before, swallowed at the edges by a darkness that pressed harder with every passing moment. It was as if the night itself had weight, and it was leaning down upon the Eclipse. The men grew restless. Their songs had died, their laughter silenced. They whispered of cursed waters and vengeful spirits. Some said this was the work of drowned sailors, men betrayed and left to rot beneath the waves. Others claimed it was a warning, that the treasure they carried had been marked, claimed by something not human. Then came the footsteps, soft at first, deliberate, echoing from the bow. Every man froze, heads turning in unison. The steps grew louder, pacing steadily across the deck. Yet no one was there. The wood groaned beneath invisible weight. The sound passed through the crew as if mocking them, circling the lanterns, moving closer, closer. And when it stopped, the air grew cold. Frost rimmed the lantern glass. The men shivered in the open night, sweat freezing on their brows. One of them muttered, voice trembling, that the shadows were no longer moving. They were watching. By the 3rd hour of night, the crew had grown too frightened to stay above. Some drifted toward the lower decks, thinking the wood and iron beneath their feet would shield them from whatever prowled the ship. But the hold of a pirate vessel is no refuge. It is a tomb waiting to be sealed. The air below was thick with damp and the stink of gunpowder, rum, and salt. The men huddled together, lanterns casting long, trembling beams across barrels and crates. But the deeper they went, the more they realized the shadows here were worse than those above. They clung to the walls like stains, blacker than pitch, bending away from the lanterns as if alive. And then came the whispers. At first, faint, like the sea pressing its voice through the timbers. But soon they grew sharper, cutting between the thrum of the ship. Voices that did not belong to any man aboard. They spoke in low tones, words slurred and stretched, not quite human. Some sounded like laughter, others like weeping, and through them all ran a single name, repeated again and again, slipping between the cracks of sanity. Graves, the captain's name. The men grew restless, shoving away barrels, prying at crates, desperate to find the source. But there was nothing, only wood, rope, and shadows that shifted when no hand touched them. The whispers grew louder, circling the hold, sliding across the floorboards, climbing the beams overhead. One man swore he felt breath against his ear, hot and rancid, though no one stood beside him. Then the barrels began to bleed. Started with a single drop, thick and black, rolling down the curve of a cask. Another followed, then another, until rivulets streamed from the wood. The men staggered back, horrified, as the liquid pooled at their boots. In the lantern light it gleamed red, dark, heavy, unmistakable. Blood. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, words no man could understand, filling the hold with the sound of dozens, perhaps hundreds of unseen throats. Some men fled screaming back to the deck, others collapsed, clutching their heads, unable to silence the voices. And as the lanterns flickered and the blood spread, a sound echoed through the belly of the eclipse that froze every heart aboard. Chains. Dragging, slow, deliberate. Something was down there with them. When the first man stumbled back onto deck, pale and stammering about blood and whispers, the others thought madness had taken him. But soon they saw it for themselves. Lantern light faltered across the planks as dark stains seeped up through the boards, spreading in thin streams between their boots. The smell of iron filled the air, heavy and sharp. The deck itself seemed to bleed. Above, the sky shifted. Clouds tore open, and from behind them rose a swollen moon, deep crimson, casting the eclipse in a glow that was neither light nor dark but something in between. The sea reflected it in broken shards, crimson ripples stretching endlessly. The crew fell silent. The world had become a place of blood. Shapes moved across the deck, clearer now in the red glow. Figures that had once been shadows began to take form. Gaunt silhouettes of men with ropes around their necks, faces bloated and gray, eyes like pits. They staggered, not walking but swaying, as though still dangling from gallows. Chains dragged from their wrists, scraping grooves into the wood. The crew scrambled, drawing cutlasses, muskets, anything they could grip. Yet their weapons shook in their hands because deep down, every man knew steel could not cut the dead. Captain Graves stood unmoving at the bow, his face bathed in the blood-colored light. His crew called out to him, desperate for orders, but he did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the crimson moon touched the sea, and his lips moved silently. He seemed not afraid, but resigned, as though he had been waiting for this night. The figures closed in. One sailor swung his cutlass wildly, and the blade passed clean through the specter before him. The thing only leaned closer, chains rattling, until its rotting face pressed inches from his own. The man screamed and dropped where he stood, his body limp, eyes wide and glassy. His soul had been stolen with nothing more than a stare. The crew broke then, chaos spilling across the deck. Some leapt overboard into the crimson waves, their bodies vanishing without a splash. Others huddled in corners, praying to gods long forgotten. But the spirits showed no mercy. They spread across the eclipse, dragging chains, their whispers rising into a chorus that drowned out the men's cries. And above it all, the blood moon burned, rising higher, staining every rope, every sail, every drop of sea with its cursed light. This was no nightfall. This was a reckoning. By the time the blood moon hung at its peak, the eclipse was no longer a ship. It was a coffin adrift on an endless red sea. The deck was littered with bodies, some stiff with terror, others staring blankly into nothing, their souls stolen clean. The whispers had grown into a roar, a storm of voices without breath, chanting in languages no man could speak. Chains rattled across the planks, dragging not toward the crew but toward the captain. Graves never moved. He stood tall at the bow, arms open, as though greeting the tide of death itself. When the first spirit reached him, its fetid hand touched his chest, and the captain smiled. The men who still lived screamed for him to fight, to resist. But the truth was written in his eyes. This was no ambush. This was fate. The eclipse shuddered as if the sea itself had seized it. Waves rose high, yet the air remained dead still. The crimson water boiled, and from beneath, something vast and unseen stirred. The ship groaned, timbers snapping like bones. One mast toppled into the sea with a hiss of steam. The spirits swarmed Graves, chains wrapping his arms, his throat, his waist. Yet he did not resist. He whispered something the others could not hear, and the ghosts howled in reply. With one final crack, the eclipse lurched downward. The deck tilted, barrels and bodies sliding into the frothing sea. Men clung to ropes, to rails, to anything they could grip, but the ocean showed no mercy. One by one, they were dragged under, their screams swallowed by salt and shadow. Lanterns hissed out. The crimson glow vanished beneath the waves. And when the ocean stilled again, there was nothing. No wreckage, no sails, no bones. Only empty water stretching to the horizon, as calm as glass. The eclipse had been claimed. Sailors who later passed through those waters swore they saw it sometimes on nights when the moon turned red. A ghostly vessel drifting silently, lanterns flickering though no flame burned, chains dragging across its deck. Some claimed to hear whispers calling them by name, promising gold, blood, or freedom. None who sailed toward it ever returned. And so the legend of the eclipse became a warning passed from crew to crew. When night falls on a pirate ship, pray it is only the dark that comes. Because the sea always remembers. And eventually the sea always claims its own.